Couloir is struggling with insomnia 2 months after starting to taper off benzodiazepine and is hoping that our program will help. I have no doubt, because it includes teachings such as those we will review in this episode, including the beach ball analogy, where we see that, yes, a suppressed nervous system that has that suppression released can be overactive, which can lead to some disruption of sleep, but that disruption is totally different from insomnia. And when we fully understand this, we can taper without any sleep struggles. Hi there, I'm Daniel, a sleep physician turned sleep coach and educator. And in this episode of Mining the Comments, we're going to look at a common question: whether coming off benzodiazepines can cause insomnia. And as this is Mining the Comments, we will start at the very comment. We'll start at a comment that came in actually very recently, and this is a comment from Couloir. And I had to research this, but Couloir actually is some geographic feature of certain mountain sides, something like that. I hope I said correctly. But anyways, let's get to the comment here. Couloir says, I never had insomnia issues until I took benzo for 2 weeks. When I stopped taking it, I could not fall asleep. I Googled it and found out that insomnia is one of the withdrawal symptoms and to taper off of it. I tapered off in 1 week. I've struggled with insomnia since 2 months in. I hope this program can help me get back to sleep. This is the comment from Couloir that inspired this episode. And Couloir, again, I have no doubt that the program will help. This was a comment on the episode Talk Insomnia, where we talked with Ben, who was in bedtime. And I think that's a wonderful program. And if you happen to be talking about the Insomnia Immunity Program, that is also a wonderful one. In both, you have the chance for discourse, asking your questions, getting a reply, asking a follow-up question, getting a reply. And I think so often it is in that kind of like back and forth that things start to click. And so I definitely have a lot of hope and belief, and have actually no doubt that this will lead to where you want to be. Now, with that said, let me share like these teachings that I think really enlighten things for us and are really, really helpful. And we're going to start, let's go over the overview here. We're going to talk about the beach ball analogy, and then we're going to talk about the insomnia definition. Again, yeah, for those of you who are, long-time viewers, you've heard this definition 1,000 times, but we're just going to go over it briefly. We need to do that for a kind of logical reasonings. And then we're going to see how we have no struggle with sleep whatsoever during or after a taper from benzodiazepines, for example. It could be any sedating medication, by the way, but we're going to focus on benzos here. So let's start with this beach ball analogy. What am I talking about here? Well, to understand this fully, we're actually going to learn a little bit about delirium tremens. It is a form of alcohol withdrawal. And I remember myself during medical school how I was in this like unit that only dealt with alcohol withdrawal. And I was actually surprised because I didn't really understand that you could have these like physical, like autonomous manifestations of alcohol withdrawal. That can be, can be quite significant. But anyways, what is delirium tremens? Well, delirium tremens is, again, a form of alcohol withdrawal that includes agitation, palpitations, high blood pressure, and other symptoms. And ChatGPT explains why this happens as follows. Chronic alcohol use depresses the central nervous system. When alcohol is suddenly removed, the brain becomes hyperexcitable, causing overactivity of the nervous system. And this overactivity is what can cause this agitation and the other symptoms we have with delirium tremens. Now, my point here is that we can see the same type of effect when we remove any type of suppression from the central nervous system, including benzodiazepines. And how I typically illustrate this with clients and students is to say that imagine that you have a beach ball and you kind of suppress it, you hold it underwater, and then you release that suppression. And I mean, we can say that we release it suddenly, kind of like to illustrate our purposes, is that what happens then is that beach ball is want to emerge, right? It naturally wants to be higher up than underwater, right? So it will emerge sometimes pretty rapidly, depending on how fast you release it, and it can even overshoot, and then it finds like its equilibrium, right? But it's the same thing with these medications that suppress our nervous system. When you remove that suppression, you can temporarily have like this overactivity until things kind of find their equilibrium, settle down. Now, and this explains, of course, why we can have symptoms such as little sleep, less sleep after we come off a benzodiazepine. Now, before we can get to like why this is so helpful to understand and how this leads us to where we want to be, let's go over our definition of insomnia. We define insomnia here as a self-perpetuating struggle with sleep that comes from our brain mislabeling wakefulness as a threat, or particularly mislabeling being awake at night as a threat, because this can lead to this loop that when our brain starts to think like, oh no, not sleeping at night is a problem, it's bad, it's a threat, it's dangerous, it shouldn't be happening, then that puts us in this excitable state, like a nervous system is kind of aroused now, and that keeps us awake at night. And when we're awake at night, we think even more like, oh no, this is a threat, this shouldn't be happening. And that then keeps us awake, and the wakefulness makes us think we're under threat. And this is what we call insomnia. It's a loop. It kind of has a life of its own. It requires no external factor to keep going, which is different from sleep disruption. Insomnia is not sleep disruption from any other cause, including tapering off benzodiazepines, because that sleep disruption that we have as we come off benzodiazepines, it's self-limited. That sleep disruption fades away as our nervous system finds its equilibrium again. And with this said, we can now start to see how we can actually taper off of benzodiazepines, or be in a kind of post-taper state without having any sleep disruption at all. And I want to illustrate this by kind of repeating what we've already learned, but in like a back and forth kind of question answer type of style. So firstly, can coming off of benzodiazepines in itself, regardless of how we think of things, regardless of how we interpret the situation or the narrative in our mind, can that in itself cause us to have some disruption of our sleep? And the answer, of course, is yes. This is the beach ball analogy. Yes, coming off of benzodiazepine in itself, regardless of how we think of it, can disrupt our sleep, can have us be awake for longer or fragment our sleep a little bit more, just because of this excitability in our nervous system. Now, second question, can coming off of benzodiazepines, regardless how we think of that and what's happening in the situation, regardless of how we interpret that, can that cause insomnia? And the answer here is actually no, because that coming off of benzodiazepine does not automatically lead us to think of not sleeping as a danger, as a threat, as a problem, as something that shouldn't be happening. And that is the root of insomnia, right? So with all that we've learned so far, let us actually go back to the comments and interpret it with our new knowledge here. And what we can read now is the following. Couloir says, I've never had insomnia until I took a benzo, right? When I stopped taking it, I could not fall asleep. Now to us, we can see that, this sounds like an expected disruption to our sleep that comes off of that comes when we come off of benzodiazepine. This is like a little bit of that beach ball effect, if we will. Then Couloir says, I Googled it and I found out that insomnia is one of the withdrawal symptoms. And this to me sounds like the moment where Couloir may have been like, oh no, this is not good. I have this. I need to come off of this. Not sleeping at night is a threat. This is kind of like the seed of insomnia, right? This is where we start to thinking of not sleeping as a threat, something mysterious, dangerous that we don't want happening, right? And then Couloir says, I taper off in 1 week and I've struggled with insomnia since for 2 months. And to me, that's a story of like, okay, now what's driving this lessening of sleep and the choppy sleep, etc., may not be the sleep disruption from coming off the benzos anymore. It may very well be actual insomnia, that there has now been a concern about lack of sleep that has been born, So now this makes a lot of sense. And that to me, the making a lot of sense to me that is the key to how we no longer struggle, even if we are having some sleep disruption. So to go over this again, Couloir likely had expected sleep disruption, read the label, or sorry, Googled it actually, was concerned about lack of sleep, and that resulted in insomnia. Now, when we have the understanding we have now that yes, coming off of benzodiazepine can disrupt my sleep, but that's self-limited, that's temporary, like the nervous system just finds its own equilibrium, then our concerns around this will fade away. And when we no longer have concerns around the fact that we may be awake more than before or more than we would like to, then there is no substrate for insomnia. There's nothing that insomnia can build upon. There's nothing that can feed insomnia. And now, even though we have some sleep disruption, we have struggle-free sleep during the taper or after the taper, or really during any other type of situation. I hope this made a lot of sense to you, Couloir, and I have no doubt that you'll find much more that is really, really valuable in our program, whether you were referring to bedtime or the Insomnia Immunity Program. But so glad I got a chance to answer you here. I hope it also brought a lot of value to anyone in the community, and I look forward to seeing you real soon again. Bye for now. Hi, it's me, Daniel, and I hope you found a ton of value in the video that you just watched. As you can probably tell, we share everything freely on our YouTube channel about what leads us from insomnia to a place of peaceful sleep for the rest of our lives. But it can take some time and bandwidth to go through all the free content to find the answers to the questions that you have. And this is why we have already done curation for you in our Insomnia Immunity Program and in bedtime. So if you want to save some time and bandwidth, those are great options for you. In our Insomnia Immunity Program, we have a video-based curriculum. In bedtime, we have a text-based curriculum. Either way, what really matters is that the content is laid out in a logical fashion, in a stepwise fashion, where every step takes you closer to that place of peaceful sleep for the rest of your life. If this sounds like something you'd like to explore, head over to our website, thesleepcoachtool.com. And if you decide to join and let us guide you forward, we can't wait to see you on the other side.